Hello, and welcome to another Register Kettle, your chance to hear about the news from the people that actually write it. Now, we're way into the AI hype cycle, but at the end of the day, as Jerry Maguire put it, show me the money. And companies and investors are now getting serious questions about where they're actually going to get ROI on AI. And are they actually going to get it in the end? Tom, you've been doing a deep dive into this. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question to be asking. I mean, the part of this comes from there was a Goldman Sachs report out in June where they're looking at the trillions spent on in capital expenditures investing in AI, and this is largely the companies like Microsoft and OpenAI and Google that are buying expensive GPUs and training models and trying to offer those models for businesses to use. And the question a lot of people are sort of asking is, are these expensive models going to pay off? And it's a difficult question because basically the term AI is just a terrible term. It covers so many things, and you kind of can get the answer that you want depending upon the way you ask it. I mean, clearly, I spoke for the story to experts at Gartner who were telling me that that they basically are advising people not to, or CIOs not to ask about ROI because in a lot of cases it's so difficult to measure, and that to me is kind of a startling admission. But I think it's actually a little bit makes some sense because a lot of these things. I mean, how do you measure the ROI of Word or something like that? So for generative AI and the kind of stuff that Microsoft Copilot is doing, it's very difficult to measure this. But on the other hand, there are other applications, like if you're doing image recognition on an assembly line to spot broken products before they get packaged up, and the image recognition works, and it's clearly better than having a person do it. There's obvious ROI for that. So it really depends on the technology that you're asking about and the context in which it's being used. And you can find examples of failed projects and also of successful projects. And the takeaway that I seem to be hearing from the people who are doing this is that it really depends upon how the organization that's implementing this sets it up, and have they actually made the necessary organizational changes and put the business processes in place to benefit from this, or are they just trying to buy an API and increase their profit by 100%?
I mean, do you feel management's getting sucked into this in that, yes, we bought all these AI systems, our productivity should be increasing, but do staff know how to use them? Is there an efficiency area to be done here?
Yeah, I mean, there was another story recently about it was a report from the Upwork Research Institute that was talking about just that. That essentially, when employers make these mandates to use AI and they don't adequately prepare their workers, they end up alienating their workers and just making them feel like they have more work to do. And so again, it comes down to the training and thinking about how this is going to fit in with what you do, rather than just saying, oh, you should be twice as productive now that you have, generative AI tools.
Well, I think also there's the component of this that I think gets missed a lot of the time is that a lot of the large language models, the generative AI tools that are being built are really just about removing barriers to an interface. What these models are really good at is taking fuzzy logic written in English or whatever language the model's trained in to interpret and translating that into something out that can be fed into something else. But that's not really what we're seeing with a lot of the early tools coming out of this. We're seeing, tools that are effectively overgrown autocomplete for email. And so I don't have to write this email anymore. And, it's like, okay, so I don't have to spend as much time on my email. Are you feeding me something else to do in this new time that I have? Am I going to tell my boss that, hey, I have all this extra half hour where I can take a breath in the middle of the day suddenly? I don't think so. And so I think a lot of the value in terms of where these models are going to go is treating it as an interface for working with other more conventional tools or other models, not necessarily a chatbot that can surface information or an email autocomplete that can look at the context of past emails and help you write a new one. I just think employees are generally smarter than going to go, oh, well, that took 5 minutes rather than agonizing over it for 30. I'm going to go make a coffee.
I want to give a use case here that I like. There are tens of millions of people in the world who are mid-level and high-level managers that want to ask questions of relational databases that run the business. And SQL is not a great language. It's a great language if you know how to use it, and not everybody knows how to use it. So it's a bottleneck to ask the people who know SQL to do these, to ask the question and then figure out, okay, can I run that thing during business hours, or do I have to wait because that might stall the systems? There are translators that people are building, and Oracle has one, IBM has one as well, that you speak in English to it, and then it creates the SQL statement, and then you don't have to do it. You don't have to know anything about it. And then somebody can check the work and make sure it's okay. But a process that might have taken days or weeks to get somebody to do for you might now take minutes. And that means you can ask a question now.
Yeah, but how much of this is prone to what we call hallucination, but basically AI getting it wrong? If you're actually doing that kind of high-level work in AI, how reliable is it, do you think, TPM?
I haven't tested it, but I think it's probably more reliable to ask it to convert English to a relatively simple SQL statement than it is to have it write or take a COBOL program and convert it to Java. Something with millions of lines of codes or hundreds of thousands of lines.
At least AI-generated code will fail spectacularly if he gets it wrong. One of the scenarios that has come up that I've seen several times is the use of AI in legal contexts, and people are using it to summarize documents and plow through massive amounts of discovery material and pull out facts. And for a lot of that sounds like a pretty good deal. If you're able to go through boxes and boxes.
It sounds like a good deal, but they're getting it wrong. At the end of the day, we need to return to the ROI on this. And if you're getting a legal document and it's wrong, then the potential harms to you are massive. So, are the amounts of money that is being spent on this actually worth it? This is what we need to find out.
The answer is very clear. Not yet. But the thing you want to think about is how much money is being spent here, and is anybody profiting at the moment?
The chip makers are certainly profiting, as we saw this week from AMD anyway. They made $1 billion on their GPUs.
I said profit.
A year ago,
I didn't say revenue.
That's right. $1 billion in revenue.
Yes. So there's lots of revenue that's happening, and Nvidia is clearly profiting to the largest extent of anybody out there. But I have been looking under, in everybody's financials to try to figure it out. And I will tell you, the major OEMs are seeing revenue bumps for these AI systems finally, because they're finally getting some allocations of GPUs, which they did not for the last year and a half.
Okay.
And now they're able to do it. And they're finally showing hundreds of millions to $1 billion worth of revenue. And they've got a pipeline that's measured in billions for Dell and HPE and Lenovo. But for each one of them, if you look at their data center businesses, that number went up, that revenue number went up, but their operating income went down.
Ooh, now, why is that?
We can't pin it on AI specifically because they don't tell us what's doing it. But it's, as Henry David Thoreau once said, some circumstantial evidence is pretty suspect. Like when there's a trout in your milk, you pretty much know something's wrong. So this is a server recession, right? They're not selling a lot of servers outside of AI, and there's some profits in the AI servers. Or the AI servers are just, money in, money out, and they're just trying to scramble to learn how to do this business.
Yeah. Well, my suspicion is over time that also a lot of the cost for the data used to train these models is going to go up, because all the sources who have this data are realizing, like Reddit, for example, are realizing they can extract payment for this, and it's going to make the production of these models even more expensive. Now, you have to balance that against, software and hardware improvements that will lead to greater, inference and training, efficiencies. But ultimately, I think that the costs for these models are going to increase, which is going to put even more pressure on people using them to figure out ways to actually do it profitably.
So the cost from the content then?
Yeah. Which is why they're using a lot more synthetic training data, because that's that's more affordable. But then the question is that really high quality? And there are a lot of risks to using too much synthetic data.
Right. There's a lot going on in the model space trying to address the flip side of this, which is the way developers are trying to implement AI into products that they can then sell to end users, or enterprises can implement internally, is through API calls. And those APIs are paid for in terms of dollars per millions of tokens. And back in when we were looking at networking costs and moving data around, we talked about the cost per bit. Now it's kind of the cost per token. And right now we're kind of in a weird spot where models are kind of outpacing the available hardware. And we have situations where in order to run the most capable models, the models that people want to use, the models that people are more likely to trust, these trillions parameter scale models, the hardware is really inefficient at running models that big. You need lots and lots of GPUs just to run them. I'm not talking about training. I'm talking about the more ubiquitous workload of just running them and serving out requests. And so hardware is trying to catch up, and it will lower the cost per bit considerably. We have new GPUs coming out with lots more memory, with a lot more memory bandwidth, with at least with large language models powering chatbots. That's kind of the barrier that you need to overcome. More memory means you can run models on fewer GPUs. Faster memory means you can achieve your performance targets on fewer GPUs, and you can lower the cost per token and make utilizing these AIs a lot less expensive for the end users and the enterprises.
Now, well, we'll see. I mean, Tim, what do you think about that? Because this is a really crucial question.
Yeah. So here's the problem. Every time you want to increase the accuracy of one of these models by a few points now, you've got to double the size of the model. If you want a grade point average across the different tests you're going to take, to go from 75% to 85%, you got to go from 400 billion parameters to a trillion, or it's something like that. That's the kind of the shape of the curve. And people are going to trillions of plural of parameters. And the number of GPUs, the amount of memory you need, is proportional directly to the number of parameters. So if you're just going to keep your model sizes static, what Tobias said is true, sort of. What is also true, though, and we'll use Nvidia as an example. With Blackwell, there's 2 GPU chips instead of one.
Right.
There's roughly twice as much memory, a little less than twice as much memory if you compare it to the original H100. And that memory itself is more expensive per gigabyte. So that's more expensive. The CoWoS that's used in it is more expensive, and the price of the device went up by, depending on how you want to reckon the price, somewhere between 1.5 and 2x, and you're only getting 2.25x more performance at peak. Nobody gets peak. So I don't know. You might just have a slightly more accurate model because you're worried about accuracy and you've got to buy more GPUs or the same number of GPUs to get that result. If you're willing to hold the model static, then yeah, that you can ride down the Moore's Law curve a little bit. But I don't know that that's true. And so far, amongst the people that are doing this at the very highest levels, they're not limiting their models.
Well, sort of. I mean, the last 2 weeks we've seen a number of still very capable models from like Llama's or Meta's Llama 3 405B, which, at least on paper, according to their benchmarks, is very competitive with models 4x its size.
Yep, according to their benchmarks.
But yeah. Models. Go ahead, Ian.
Sorry, according to their benchmarks, but yes.
According to their benchmarks, but they're going to have a trillion parameter model at some point because they want to get a grade point average of 83% instead of 75%. And they're going to push that barrier. And the question you have to ask when you're trying to get your ROI is a 405 billion model going to be good enough for you? And by the way, I think for most enterprises, that answer is going to be fine. I've been preaching that to the choir for a long time. PyTorch plus Llama plus AMD or Nvidia GPUs, if you can get either of them, is going to be good enough for most enterprise projects to do something with generative AI. It's not enough to get artificial general intelligence, absolutely not. But that's going to take billions of dollars worth of a cluster to accomplish that, maybe tens of
even if it's possible. There are serious questions as to whether or not this is actually AGI is actually possible.
Yeah, but that's their mission. They're trying to make money off of what they're building at Microsoft and Meta and Google, et cetera. But they'll make money. I assure you, they're going to make much more money as a cloud provider of iron than they're ever going to make selling Gen AI services, period. And that's the neat thing about it.
Well, we've already seen companies actually, Tom, Tobias, you've covered this. I mean, companies actually getting loans, leveraging their own hardware on this front. This seems like a zero-sum game because the hardware is going to get out of date and the interest payments will come. Is this kind of like Last Chance Saloon?
I don't know, Tom, if you want to weigh in on that one. Otherwise, I think
it's funny that they're doing it. I mean, if that's the way they can raise money by using their GPUs as collateral, great. I think they're going to hold value for a while.
Again, so much of this is situationally dependent. I mean, you look at something like, I don't know, the military, and they're going to have AI all over the place. But something like Meta being one of the big open source model advocates, you have to wonder what their end game for this is, because they essentially are using these tools to provide models that will be used on their services for consumers to then create low value generative AI content that gets shared and commented on, and just to generate engagement so they can sell ads to that are largely bots. I mean, it's just like a snake eating its tail of
Yes.
crap. I mean,
the talk on Wall Street today, by the way, is everyone keeps talking. I'm listening to Bloomberg all morning while I was working, and everyone keeps saying the models are being used to make the ads better. And I'm like, no, that's not. And they're getting it wrong, as they often do. They're saying
and real uses of AI. I mean, like just language translation is super good now. I mean, a couple of years ago, people laughed at sort of speech recognition and language translation, and it's now really, really good. And that's all AI. We don't even think about that anymore. It's just like it's there. It's software.
But is that going to make up the money? Is that going to make up for the billions and trillions that are now being pushed into into this area? Because the amounts of money involved we've seen from this week's financial results are staggering, and I'm not quite sure whether they can get. I mean, long term you might get ROI, but in the short term, I'm just not seeing it. Am I wrong?
I think expectations are a little overblown to some extent. I think past innovations of this scale have had massive blowups. Think about the dot-com boom, where valuations went nuts with no substantiation behind it. And so I think the hype cycle is really driving a lot of expectations, and while it's driving VC dollars, people are willing to feed into that. However, at some point, somebody has to stand up and say, well, actually, it's going to take some time to make this work, because while we can do this one thing, we don't actually know how to make it useful in a meaningful way. And looking a quarter back, Zuckerberg took a lot of heat for saying it's going to be 5 years before we figure it out. It might be longer, and it's going to take a lot more money before we get there. I think the reality is these are really hard problems where the only way to solve them is to iterate on them. And will it pay off? Well, nobody wants to take the risk that they're going to miss the boat by pulling out early.
I think the parallel that we got to think about, if you're talking about enterprises in particular, we got to stop looking at the hyperscalers, because they have a different agenda. The cloud guys, they have a different agenda. The parallel you want to draw is the late 90s, when SAP created the first really integrated ERP system. And I remember reading through, they would get case studies from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies, and they would walk you through the prior systems, the current systems, the ROI, because they could do different things with the software, and they could demonstrate every time with real customer experience, including their own. IBM was one of their case studies, because they moved from all their hodgepodge of garbage they used to run their own business to SAP R3. And when they did that again and again and again, then enterprises said, okay, and guess what? It's the Y2K crisis. It's 1998. We finally believe SAP, and now we believe Oracle too. And then there was this tremendous spending boom for ERP systems because they weren't going to update their old code.
You're right. It's time for something new.
That was a real wave of revenue, and it transformed back office stuff. Now we're talking largely about front office type things for the most part. And it's a little different, but there's going to be a lot of skepticism, and the ROI is going to have to be demonstrated for the top 50,000 companies in the world to spend. And this is my thesis now too, this business that Nvidia has can go up, but it's going to plateau because they're going to take time to come in and do that.
Right.
It's not going to keep going like this. It's going to come up, and you see it already with Nvidia. The projections are for $4.5 billion in revenue this year. If you do the math on that, they're going to go up to about $1.6 billion, and they're going to just hold. That's how the year's going to unfold. And I believe that Nvidia will hit that point. I've said that fiscal 2025 is peak Nvidia. Now, what I mean by that is it goes up and it stays. I didn't say it's going to go straight back down again. That's not what I said. And everyone's like, you can't really mean that. I'm like, yeah, I do. Because it's not so simple to get the 50,000 biggest companies on earth to buy all this quite yet. Some will. They'll find the use cases. They'll take their time. And then it'll keep that plateau, or it might grow 5 times faster than GDP, but it's not going to keep doubling.
No.
It's not.
Yeah. I mean, there's an additional complication in that there's a human willingness to use these tools that has to be addressed, because a lot of the scenarios that have not been thought out is, what happens when AI is doing your email and also handling the reply? I mean, you just get this, echo chamber of AI, and it has to be integrated into a mode of sort of interpersonal interaction that makes sense for people. I mean, people are going to stop reading marketing material if it is all AI generated. And, what's the point of doing document summaries if nobody reads them and you just pass the summary off to an AI and ask for some, report on that? I mean, it becomes a really,
we joked that the internet will just be this thing that's muttering to itself all the time.
Yeah. I mean, the people will just leave.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, as we come back to the snail eating its tail again. Okay, that's been a really good one. And yeah, we're going to have to see how this works out. I have to say, you've got to spend a lot to make a lot, but in this case, we're going to have to watch very carefully, because there's a lot of merchants out there who are somewhat flim-flammy. I may be wrong on this, but we'll see. Okay, well, thank you very much. It's fascinating Kettle as ever. We'll be back next week. And if you want the audio version of this, you can get it from your standard podcast suppliers. But thank you, Tobias, Tom, and TPM, and we'll see you all soon.